Hello and welcome to Monday in Parliament. The main news from Westminster: despair over the poor quality of rail services in the southeast of England.
Jobs are being lost, relationships being broken up, the economy seriously damaged. This situation is intolerable.
Labour rejects government plans to give social workers new ways of supporting vulnerable children.
Nobody in the profession believes that privatisation is the answer to the immense challenges they are currently facing, nor can it alleviate the growing demand for children's services.
And the Lords wrestle with a long-standing problem: how to reduce the number of peers.
The only acceptable method for reducing the size of a House of Parliament in a parliamentary democracy is democracy.
Yeah. But first, jobs lost, relationships broken up, tears of anger. MPs have been venting the frustration felt by passengers on trains run by Southern Rail. Management and employees from Southern Rail are battling over the introduction of what's called driver-only operation. The unions, ASLEF and the RMT, say conductors are needed as well as drivers to ensure the safety of passengers. But managers say drivers can take sole responsibility for safety. The dispute has been going on for months and further strikes are due to start. The Transport Minister Paul Maynard was called to the Commons to make an urgent statement. His anger with the unions was evident.
Let me be clear. This strike action is politically motivated and has affected passengers for far too long. Union leaders have even described this action as, quote, carrying on Fidel's work. This will be of no comfort to passengers who just want to get to work. I will continue to ensure that the management of the train operating company is doing everything in its power to run improved services. But we also need union leaders to stop their needless, unreasonable, disproportionate and politically motivated strikes.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Minister for that reply. I put this question today with cross-party support from members right across the House, because on Friday we heard that Southern Rail services will be severely disrupted every day from tomorrow until further notice.
The Green MP Caroline Lucas, whose constituency is in Brighton on the south coast, is a regular passenger on Southern Rail. She had initiated the urgent statement. She said there were problems with Southern Rail well before the strike action started.
Back in May 2015, the then Rail Minister said that our services were flashing red in her department. 18 months on, my constituents are regularly in tears of anger and frustration. Jobs are being lost, relationships being broken up, the economy seriously damaged. This situation is intolerable, and the government can't simply just wash its hands of involvement. So will the Minister roll up his sleeves and get stuck in to resolve the crisis?
The best thing she can do on behalf of her constituents is to go and speak to her close friends in the RMT and tell them to call off their disproportionate and unreasonable industrial action. That is the best contribution she can make.
That this House is still having to address the abysmal service provided by Southern Rail after a year and a half of substandard service is testament to both Southern's incompetence and the extent to which this government is committed to privatise rail, even when franchises have become so deeply dysfunctional that they are unable to provide a decent public service. Mr Speaker, GTR should be stripped of their franchise long ago for failing to plan properly to take on the franchise, as they themselves have admitted, and providing what is by far the country's worst rail service. Honourable members whose constituents rely on Southern will be well aware of stories of passengers fainting on overcrowded trains, jobs being jeopardised by repeated lateness, and parents having to say goodnight to their children from a delayed train.
A Conservative was very pleased to hear that rail staff were not facing job losses.
Can I tell the Minister that's not the case for some of my constituents who have been sacked because they have been late? And has not the balance of rights and responsibilities in our society got somewhat astray when, in order to improve their terms and conditions, we're actually costing other citizens their jobs?
I think my honourable friend is entirely right to point out the grossly disproportionate nature of this industrial action. He is right to point out commuters up and down the GTR network are experiencing a poorer quality of life because of this unwarranted industrial action.
Coincidentally, Mr. Speaker, I delivered a petition to number 10 Downing Street this morning calling for Southern to be sacked. Will the Minister acknowledge that it is not just the unacceptable and pointless union action that is causing chaos on the network, but also repeated network rail equipment failure, repeated train failures, which are Southern's fault, a shortage of drivers, which is Southern's fault? And when will the Minister step in and take control away from the failing company, pass responsibility for Transport for London, which we, the Liberal Democrats, called for as far back as 1999, and ensure that passengers are provided with much more generous compensation?
His analysis of the multiple causes is correct, but what I don't think he fully appreciates is that the need to focus on Network Rail as a source of many of the delays means that we have to have full, rapid and ready access to the track day in, day out. We cannot do that against a backdrop of continual industrial action that actually makes it harder to maintain the railway.
The Transport Minister, Paul Maynard, grappling with some knotty problems on the railways. The Conservative former Children's Minister, Tim Lawton, has criticised a government measure designed to improve the care of vulnerable children. The Children and Social Work Bill allows local councils to opt out of standard care regulations and develop new approaches to safeguarding children. The House of Lords has rejected the provision, but when the bill had its first airing in the Commons, an Education Minister said the government would be reinstating it.
Clause 29 as it was would have allowed local authorities to request exemptions from their statutory duties in children's social care. This would be, Mr Deputy Speaker, the first time in the history of children's welfare that legislation made for all vulnerable children and young people could be disapplied in a particular area. This is a very radical proposal that should at least have warranted a green paper and a white paper and proper consultation, but there was absolutely none. So not surprising that the NSPCC and Action for Children describe this as the case that the government is making presents considerable risks. Despite numerous conversations with ministers and officials, the evidence for the need for this power remains unconvincing and does not justify the potential risks of suspending primary legislation.
The Minister defended the proposed new power to innovate.
The power is a direct response to the issues raised by Professor Arlene Munro in her independent review of child protection. She says that trusting professionals to use their judgment rather than be forced to follow unnecessary legal rules will help ensure children get the help they need when they need it. And the power is not to do with taking rights away from children. It's not to do with saving money. It's about giving councils the opportunity to develop new ways of working which they believe will improve outcomes for children. I give way to my honourable friend again.
If he says it's not about taking away rights from children, one of the scenarios would be the abolition of independent reviewing officers, who absolutely can be the only voice independently standing up for vulnerable, looked after children in local authorities. If they go under these proposals, how is that not taking away the rights of children, vulnerable children in particular?
This isn't about abolishing any statutory responsibilities, and I would just say to my honourable friend that he should wait to see what amendments are going to be tabled during the passage of this bill in committee. And I'm sure that my honourable friend will want to talk to the Children's Minister in more detail about his concerns, and I know that he will take my honourable friend's concerns very seriously indeed.
Once already in the other place, the government plans for the outsourcing and privatisation of our children's services dressed up as innovation were defeated. Nobody in the profession believes that privatisation is the answer to the immense challenges they are currently facing, nor can it alleviate the growing demand for children's services. I would give way.
I'm so grateful to my honourable friend who's doing a very good job at putting the case that exists in the country. Is she concerned that the Minister really hasn't said very much at all about what innovation he expects that would require a local authority effectively to wash their hands of their statutory duty in relation to our young people and children?
And I just wanted to point out that in my conversations with the Hull City Council Children's Services Department, they talked to me about the resource inequalities that they face, a very disadvantaged community that they're serving, and they're certainly not asking for powers to innovate, they're asking for proper resources to provide the services that young people need in the city.
And if we are to find better ways to care for the vulnerable children that we all feel so deeply about, we need to be, I think, open to new ideas. And I hope it might be possible to revisit the idea of this cause, which was very much supported by my own local authority in Hampshire, but also experts such as Professor Eileen Munro. It's right that this tightly regulated area is as protected as it is, but I cannot believe that it would not benefit from looking at new ways of working.
Can I please then ask the Minister to look at Scotland, to look at what we're doing there? We are not perfect, we are not doing everything right, but we have at the heart of our system children, their experiences, and we are listening to them. Please ask the Minister to look up north and to Wales, who are also doing really good work in the area of child protection and childcare across the board.
Now, more than 3 million EU nationals will need documents to prove they are entitled to live and work in the UK once Britain leaves the European Union. That's according to the Home Secretary, Amber Rudd. But ministers would not be drawn on how much such a scheme would cost.
Assuming that a deal is reached under which EU citizens who are here before a certain cut-off date can remain after we leave the European Union, can the Home Secretary tell the House how the Home Office is going to document them, an estimated 3 million people, so that employers and landlords will know thereafter to whom legally they can offer a job or accommodation and therefore distinguish them from those EU citizens who arrived after that?
Secretary.
Well, the right honourable gentleman raises an important point. We are aware that there is a certain expectation and concern about the European Union citizens here. And as the Prime Minister has said, she hopes to be able to reassure them. But it is right that we do that while looking also at the over 1 million UK citizens in the rest of the European Union. There will be a need to have some sort of documentation. He is entirely right. But we are not going to set it out yet. We are going to do it in a phased approach to ensure that we use all the technology advantages that we are increasingly be able to harness to ensure that all immigration is carefully handled.
The Secretary of State has just confirmed that the 3 million EU citizens in the UK will have to be documented. If this processing adds roughly 10% to the Home Office workload, does the Minister accept that this will cost at least £100 million a year and require 3,000 extra staff? And if he doesn't, what's his estimate?
Could I make it clear that people who are here from elsewhere in the EU working legally do not need to receive additional documentation this time? Could we assure them that their status is assured? Now, what happens in the future is a matter for the negotiations, but certainly can make it absolutely clear that no additional documentation is needed at this stage.
Charlie Elphick. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I make the case to the Minister for updating of the systems and use of computers and information technology in border control going forward, particularly as with Brexit we'll need to count people in and count people out more effectively, and for investment in our ports like the Port of Dover?
Well, certainly exit checks that were introduced in 2015 have given us an additional tool to be able to track people as they enter and leave, in particular leave the country, and indeed new technologies such as e-gates has helped very much in that regard.
There were calls for foreign students to be excluded from the government's target for cutting immigration.
Students should be removed from the tens of thousands target. And does she also agree that since the data is extremely poor, we should strain every sinew to try and get better quality data on the basis of which we can form a judgment about whether, and if so, how we can ensure that exports from which are what students are maximised in this country?
Absolutely hopelessly long. Sorry, but really hopeless. We've got to do a lot better than that. Home Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I share my honourable friend's view that students play an important role in contributing to the economy and are most welcome in the UK. The internationally recognised definition of a migrant is someone coming here for over 12 months, so they are likely to stay within that definition, although I'm aware there are different views on this matter.
Perhaps the Chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee can be the author of the textbook. Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The pressure is on. The Home Secretary, though, refers to the measure of net migration. She was asked about the target. Does she agree that that international students should be taken out of the government's target, as the Foreign Secretary has said over the weekend, and as the Chancellor of the Exchequer seemed to hint some weeks ago? Does she think that foreign students should be included in the target?
Well, as I told the House, Mr. Speaker, and the Right Honourable Lady is aware, there are different views on this. The definition that I referred to was for international students, which is held by the ONS, which is for over 12 months. They represent an immigrant and therefore part of the numbers.
The Home Secretary, Amber Rudd. You're watching Monday in Parliament with me, Christina Cooper. The new MP for Richmond Park, the Liberal Democrat Sarah Olney, has taken her seat in the House of Commons. Sarah Olney caused a political upset by taking the seat from Zac Goldsmith, overturning a majority of 23,000. Mr Goldsmith triggered a by-election in the South West London constituency when he resigned from the Conservatives over the decision to go ahead with a third runway at Heathrow. As the Lib Dems also oppose Heathrow expansion, they turned the campaign into a verdict on Brexit. Mr Goldsmith voted for Brexit, and Richmond Park is a strongly pro-Remain area. Sarah Olney was escorted into the Commons by the Lib Dem leader Tim Farron and by Alistair Carmichael. Her arrival was rather muted, perhaps because there are only 8 fellow Liberal Democrats to provide the cheers.
Will the member wishing to take her seat please come to the table?
I swear by Almighty God that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, her heirs and successors, according to law. So help me God.
After signing what's known as the test roll, she was welcomed by the Speaker with an extended handshake.
Sarah Olney, member for Richmond Park.
Sarah, many congratulations.
Sarah Olney bringing the tally of Lib Dems up to 9 and providing the party with its only woman MP. Ministers are proposing to increase the maximum sentence for causing death by dangerous driving from 14 years to life imprisonment. That would include crashes caused by a driver using a mobile phone at the wheel. But peers said a change of culture was needed, similar to the one achieved for drink driving.
We all welcome the Prime Minister's commitment to make this dangerous and potentially devastating practice socially unacceptable. The increased penalties, the proposals that drivers who kill while using a mobile phone could face a life sentence should be a real deterrent to this growing and seemingly obsessive addiction. But previous increases in penalties... Ask the question. Thank you. Thank you for that. I need to make this point. Previous increases in penalties have not had a lasting impact. Will the Minister tell us what plans the government has to ensure an adequate enforcement of its new measures?
The Noble Lord makes an important point about enforcement. The laws are only as good enough when they're enforced. We have seen a rising tide of use of mobile phones of drivers behind vehicles, and that's through admitting it themselves through various reports that have been held. And we'll be working very closely with both the police and crime commissioners as well as the police forces to ensure much more effective enforcement.
Increased sentences will no doubt help, but as the Noble Lord has recognised and the questioner recognises, a change of culture is really what is required. And I wonder whether his department has considered introducing in addition to a penalty for mobile phone offenders, mandatory attendance at mobile phone awareness courses paid for by the offenders, rather than offering such courses as an optional alternative to points and a penalty as at present.
The issue the Noble Lord refers to about courses has been practiced, and it's been left to the discretion of the police to offer that. However, it's the government's view that this issue now needs to be scaled up, and therefore we're actually promoting that those discretionary courses are not offered, but to raise awareness through campaigns such as Think, and of course increase awareness of the revised penalties that will be implicated if someone is caught using a mobile phone. Let's be clear, if you use your mobile phone, it's not hands-free and you're using it and you're caught, it is a criminal offence.
Given that the motoring organisations seem to be extremely dubious of the safety of using hands-free equipment in a motor car, I'm wondering whether or not the government's got any plans to regulate car manufacturers' ability to produce this equipment, which is distracting, I believe, and can cause accidents.
And the Right Reverend Prelate raises an issue on the manufacturing of motor cars. Certainly the government isn't talking specifically on this issue. I mean, the issue of hands-free mobile phone use is, of course, very difficult to regulate and indeed enforce. And I would say to the Right Reverend Prelate, of course, there are other distractions which are often available in the car, the use of loud music. Indeed, being a father of 3 children, if I have all 3 of them going in the back seat at the same time, that's equally quite a high distraction. But on a more serious point, we are looking to ensure that we inform the public, and campaigns such as Think, I believe, will take forward the importance of not using mobile phones in your hand when you're driving.
Let's stay with the Lords, which spent most of the day debating the size of the House of Lords. At the moment, the number of peers stands at well over 800. That makes the Lords one of the largest chambers in the world. That eye-catching fact, and how to reduce the size of an unelected chamber, has spawned numerous reports, debates and incremental changes, such as a retirement scheme. A Conservative Lord Cormac said it was time to reduce the number of peers.
Almost every time your Lordship's House is commented on in the public press and in the media, 2 remarks are made again and again and again. That this is the largest second chamber in the world, and that it's the largest legislative chamber of any sort in the world after the People's Republic of China. And, my Lords, the constant reiteration of those facts, and unfortunately they are facts, they cumulatively drown the recognition of the exact scrutiny we apply to bills, of the quality of our debates. All of us will remember the first debate on the Noble Lord Faulkner's assisted dying bill. And whatever line one took in that bill, one had to be proud to be a member of this House. And the very next day, all the papers had leaders and long reports of the debate saying this was Parliament at its best. My Lords, that is the image that we wish to present, and not the image of an over-bloated House with too many members in it.
I think we can criticise how we got here. We know that there was a surge of influx in terms of the Liberal peers. We know that the former Prime Minister pushed every boundary in terms of appointments, but I don't want to, tempting though it is, to go into that. But I do think a couple of points have to be made clear. If we are to take steps to reduce the size of this House, then we cannot have a Prime Minister from any government using that as an excuse for stuffing this House with more of their appointments. And secondly, we must maintain the principle that no government has a right to having a majority in this House. That would undermine the purpose of it.
There have been many variations of musical chairs suggested by those who want to tinker with the problem. What they have in common is a denial of surely the first principle of parliamentary democracy, that is, for legislators to be at least predominantly elected. Those in this House who continue to obstruct real democratic reform risk an increasing public demand for a unicameral parliament, which I and my colleagues certainly do not support. In short, my Lords, The only acceptable method for reducing the size of a House of Parliament in a parliamentary democracy is democracy.
An independent peer was also clear that the status quo was not an option.
Realistically, there is, to my mind, only one answer to the central question which is raised by today's motion. Yes, swollen as this House now is, not least through a whole host of new appointments by Mr Cameron over recent years, we're plainly too large and we are widely mocked on that account.
And to think otherwise, he said, was living in cloud cuckoo land. Well, that's it from Monday in Parliament. Alicia McCarthy will be here for the rest of the week, but from me, Christina Cooper, goodbye.